Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you might see a link down below. And if you click on it, you'll end up in Zoom. You'll see another link there. If you click on that, you'll end up in Mukana. And that's where you become a producer. You actually drive the entire show. What we talk about, how long we talk about it, all those things are largely up to you, depending on the questions that you ask and the questions that you vote on. If you think you can actually be on the show and answer some of those questions, we would love to have you. This panel is an incredible source of knowledge, and we'd love to, if you think you can add to that, we'd love to have you join us. It's a great way also to get to know people. We move a lot of stuff between us, and the way we kind of get to know each other oftentimes is through the panel. So it's a great place to, if you have knowledge to share or something to make available to everyone, it's a good place to go. Anyway, so you need to be here by 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time to be part of the mic checks. If you're not sure if you're ready, just come early at 6 o'clock a.m. Pacific Standard Time is when we open the doors. First hour is something that, is general questions, anything you have around media or virtual production. Second hour is something we've decided to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we've got a couple folks here that use Keynote a lot. And we're all going to trade notes about how we use Keynote and answer your questions about Keynote. Tomorrow, we have the folks from Monogram in, and what they do is they make a piece of hardware. I have a piece of it right here. See this little piece? This just snaps on. It snaps onto another piece and snaps onto another piece. And you can control a lot of different pieces of software with it, and it's kind of slick. So they're going to come and show us that. That'll be tomorrow. And then, of course, we have education 9 to 11 on Saturday. And we don't stream that one, and it's gotten to be, as soon as we stopped streaming it, it got really good really fast. so it was, I think a lot of people didn't feel like they could speak freely, and now they can. And so anyway, it's worth coming if you're into any area of education. There's a lot of pretty deep discussion going on Saturdays from 9 to 11. All right, let's jump into the questions, Bill.
Sure. First one this morning comes from Chirig Chahita in Dallas, and Chirig says, Jonas, what are your latest updates on Playoutbee?
Jonas?
So probably the biggest one is that we finally finalized the macOS version of Playoutbee. So it's now also available on a Mac.
And does it work on is it M1 ready?
I haven't tested it on an M1, but Guy tested it on an M1 and it worked fine.
Perfect.
Since the device I'm building it on is a 2014 Mac Mini, so I think everything up above that should work fine. Yeah, then we added a nice API. We have you have all the transport controls now: play, pause, stop, select clip, set loop, next. But you can also get them. So what I actually do is when I integrate it into vMix, I can get the current clip as data source and send that back to the speakers. You can upload now over the API, and what did we also? Oh yeah, and another cool feature that a lot of people wanted is you can specify an action at the end of a video. I don't have a smooth going over from video 1 to video 2 yet, but how I use it is I can queue the next one. So with autoplay working, I can have my Playoutbee on input 8 of my Atem. I press cut, it plays, then I cut back. And as soon as the video ended, it goes to the next one. So if I press cut again, it just goes on with the next one.
That's awesome. Bill?
I just wondered if Jonas would like to talk a little bit, just the basic definition of what Playoutbee is for any of our viewers who haven't followed this.
Go ahead, tell us, Jonas.
Playoutbee basically is a software that turns almost any device now that our requirements right now is can it play a YouTube video? If it can, we probably can use it for Playout. But now we support Raspberry Pi, Windows, and macOS. And the cool thing is that we integrated the hyperdeck protocol. So for the Atem, it looks like a normal hyperdeck, but you also have a web control, so you can pull it up on your phone. The producer can have the time codes on a tablet and all that.
A question for you is, on the Mac side, do you know if it's able to play out Apple ProRes?
I have to check on that. Probably not, because Apple restricted some stuff.
Really? Yeah, because usually it's supported in the anyway. I'm excited about it, and I'm excited especially if my requests on it is that it plays Apple ProRes at all levels, and that it can support up to 64 channels of audio. I'll buy a bunch of them from you. So anyway,
I'll see on that.
Most of that stuff is all supported in the core, in the core stuff. So you should just be making calls to you shouldn't have to. You don't want actually to write anything to it, because don't try to overthink what Apple is providing you, because what they've proven is if you do that, then you can't make it to the next update. Yeah. So what you need to do is just use their libraries, but their library should support all of those things. And man, that'd be super valuable to us. Super excited about Playoutbee. We're building a little rack of them. We've been busy in a production, but as soon as we get out of the production, we're building like a little rack of Raspberry Pis that are going to do that. But we would be really interested in being able to, the one thing that we're trying to figure out is how to do 10-bit and with, channels. So
do you know if the Apple TV can do 10-bit?
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
That might be an interesting platform.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it would be. I mean, I think that the responsiveness, I'd be interested to see if it responds as fast. The Apple TV is a little sluggish in the way that it manages things. Go ahead, Alex.
I'm only just understanding this stuff now from the point of view of switching stuff and sources. But how about NDI and Playoutbee?
So I use it in the cloud, and what I use right now is Winchester, which turns the Playoutbee output window into NDI. But there might be native NDI at some point.
And I highly recommend, and where can people buy Playoutbee?
Either on playoutbee.com or on Gumroad. I'll put in a link.
Put a link in Mokana, please. Yeah, and I think that as users, we should buy it. We should make it part of our community, because we can ask some random person to try to fix something on their playout system, or we can have someone that's in the panel who can make updates. So it's in our best interest to support the family, and then it will support us. So anyway, there's been things that have been added and adjusted, and Jonas has been kind enough to sit in for our Raspberry Pi builds and everything else. And so it's we definitely want to. This is like a little it's a little seed that's grown up into a little plant now, and let's keep growing it as a group. All right, next question.
Moving on, the next one comes from David Brady in New York. And David says, looking forward to the new Playoutbee. In an effort to free up some data ports, is it possible to use Wi-Fi for control, provided its IP is static or DHCP reserved?
It is possible, but it will not always work. It shouldn't have any problems with Wi-Fi, because it's just sending really small packets over. But I wouldn't use Wi-Fi.
There you go. Next question.
Move on to Greg Gibson out of Washington, D.C. this morning. And Greg says, I'm changing the lighting in my media production workspace. Should I go with something closer to daylight or 5,000 Kelvin? Or should I go a little warmer around 2750 to 3,000?
Good, Carl.
So 5600K is what you should be aiming for. There's no problem with color accent lights, but your white light should be 5600. Even if you're in a closed space with no daylight coming in, you'll find that there's daylight bulbs, so your lamps will also be 5600. Or you can put colored lights in there, like the aperture lamps. You can put them in and change them to orange if you want accent lights to be orange. But for skin tone, for a lot of reasons, I can think of 1,000 reasons why 5600 is good, and probably one reason why 3200 would be good. But the biggest reason is that the RGB Bayer pattern on the front of the sensor has to be tuned to something. Yep. It's actually tuned to daylight. So it's actually tuned to 5600. And this is why when digital cinema was starting, HMI lights were really important, because those HMI lights, even inside, they gave a much better color response for the digital cameras than tungsten lights.
Go ahead, Rupert.
The way I read the question was production workspace. It may not necessarily mean that it's going to be on camera filming all the time. It may just be a place to work. For that, I prefer warmer lights. In fact, I even keep them dimmed down. I would call those house lights. And then if I'm going to go on camera, then I shut those down and then turn on my other lights for being on camera.
I have to admit that I assume that everything will be on camera. So that's kind of like, there's no place in my house that I've assumed that won't eventually be on camera. Go ahead, Bill.
As much as the native color temperature, for me, full spectrum is as important, if not more important. If you get a light that has a limited spectrum, and there are a lot of different kinds out there that'll do that, you can't use a filter to notch something that's already gone. If you start with everything, you can use filters, which are lighting gels, to take out frequencies from that full spectrum. So most lights now have a color rendering index, which gives you a hint as to their width and breadth of spectrum. Those are good things to pay attention to. Keep that number as high as you can find.
Next question.
Moving to Rupert McBain of Dallas, Texas.
Rupert. He's right here.
Oh, Rupert, yeah.
McRae. Yeah, anyway, go ahead.
The BBC operates a so-called talent cloud, a database of production freelancers and freelance work available at the BBC with guides and resources also. What other broadcasters or large production houses offer something similar?
I don't know if they offer it. We all have them. We tend to call it the Rolodex. You know, and when you hire someone as a producer, what you're hiring is their Rolodex, you know, that they know who to, and I have to admit that my Rolodex has mostly become office hours, which is why it's really good to be on the panel. So anyway, but yeah, the Rolodex is who you know. I mean, and I will admit that Pixel Core and office hours forms probably 80%, 90% of everyone that I've hired in the last 10 years. You know, I've approached it that way as how do I build a network that I can see people, you know, and you build projects and do stuff. Now, BBC has lots of projects to hire people for. And so they, you know, they have a lot of notes. We built up within Pixel Core some ratings internally that were useful, which is that we wanted to know, whether they had done what their skill set was, what our judgment of their skill set was. We had some certification starting when we closed it up, and then 2, how many hours they did stuff with us, you know, just how long they did it, and number 3 is how we felt they worked with others. And those are the 3 things that we measure everyone, you know, like in what we do is you know, skill set, experience, and working well with the team. So, and all those are the 3 big things, but I don't know who else. I mean, there's production hub is one that's public. The problem is that it's just so hard to know you definitely have to understand in our industry, it's all who you know, like it's all, you know, like it's who you worked with the last time. It's who you, you know, it's all, and so every time you're interacting with them and how you interact with them and everything else it's whether they're going to recommend you, whether you're going to recommend them. You just have to always take that into account. And if you know, you can be really good at what you do, and if you're prickly, that won't matter. like, you know, like it's like, it won't matter that, you know, you won't matter that you're really good at what you do, because people will be like, oh, but it's hard. And sometimes they'll hire you because they don't have anyone else, or because you do know that one thing. But the people that we hire tend to be really easygoing, you know, you know, attentive, and good at what they do. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So if you want to get from the beginning of the pool, then you got colleges that have groups that do stuff like that. Community TV, I know that's few and far between nowadays, but community TV was always a great way to get broadcasters and producers, because they've been working on their craft. And then PBS always has a list of people that they have that you can choose from.
Go ahead, Alex.
I've been on the Talent Cloud database for, I think, 2 or 3 years, and I've never got work from anyone at the BBC that way. But various people at the BBC recommend me for previous projects that I've worked on, and then I work on the next project for the BBC. So there's that too.
It's so much easier to keep the clients that you have than to find new ones. so it's super important that you figure out, you know, how to make that work. And again, one of the things that we're working on in office hours is this big volunteer program that you see a little link to all the time, is us giving ourselves an opportunity to get to know each other, you know, and you know, and to, you know, work together on something that we can afford to, you know, we don't want it to break, but we can afford for it to break, so that we can all get better together, but also get to know each other and figure out who we like to work with. And it's different for everybody. Some people like one kind of person, other people like other kind of people, you know, so but all of us working together across projects is something that we're going to spend a lot of time on this fall. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say kind of like what Alex was saying, that, you know, friend of a friend, or, you know, referrals. There's people that I work with that I've been working with for 30 years.
Yeah.
And I always say that people hire people, companies don't hire companies. And there are producers that I work with today that I've worked with through 3 or 4 jobs that they've had.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, I, 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 you know, I know that there's a lot of this is I'm going to get into deep into a prickly subject, but people say, oh well, you should always the first thing you should ask when someone asks you to do something is how much is it paying? That's the thing. You should never take any work for free, and you should never do anything like that. Almost all my relationships started with me doing something for free. Like almost all of them, began with like me doing, like I have some friends that work at a couple different companies, but even before that, if they called me and said, hey, I'm trying to figure something out, I'd just show up with gear and we'd just go do it, and we'd build connections. And I've literally done for those friends who I've done that with, again, I had done it without any expectation before they were where they were. And I probably done $30 million of work for them, for those people, and so it's not, it all comes back. You shouldn't overextend yourself that way, and you shouldn't do it for people who aren't good people, however you measure that. But the, just because you're not going to get anything out of that. But if you take it on, you can learn a lot. Like I would say, like, for instance, the stuff that we did with Schy on Mad in the Kitchen, we all learned a lot. We figured a lot of things out. And I ended up hiring a bunch of people that worked on it at one point or another, because we got to know them, and not so much hired them, but we also figured it out. Like Nate, I've worked with forever, but testing, like I was not ready to test a remote switching system from Nate's office on a real project. And we figured it all out and got it all working and got it synced up on something that we did. So, if you're not busy, you want to find things to work on, and you'll never get it done on your own. Like you just never get your own projects is really the slowest way to do it, because you're not working on a team. You're not producing anything fun that fast. It's hard to do everything yourself. And so, but you should, the number one thing that I would say about this, and I know that we're extending this conversation, we'll move on in a second, but is you always have to keep your legs moving. Like that is the number one thing, is to keep your legs moving, either your own project, someone else's project, paid projects, free projects, whatever it is. Do not let yourself slow down. Be appropriate with your energy, take your days off that you need, but I tend to keep work days all the time. And work days for me are 6.5 days. Go ahead, Schy.
Well, and I will say, I missed, it was very intense doing that project for 9 solid weeks, back to back to back, but I do miss everybody. Yeah. And that routine but also getting to know each other, the other skills is amazing. And we now have a product, and I'm consolidating it now so we can get out there and pitch it. We did a show.
Yeah, we did.
You guys did a show. It was awesome.
That's good. Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Moving on to the second of Rupert McCrae's show. And I had to say his name carefully because I messed it up so badly earlier. Rupert's second one is, it seems almost every tech-related trend at the moment includes something about artificial intelligence, AI, or machine learning, ML. Where will this apply in production?
There's a lot of things that we've done in the past where the machine hands the operator things to, it makes their job easier. So one of the things, a good example is in Hangouts a long time ago, and we're going to be putting this back into some of the stuff we're doing for office hours. Hangouts, we could basically soft click people where the algorithm would constantly be cutting between them, but we were deciding who it would possibly cut to. That's a very simple version of this. But as you start to look at this, like for instance, what we're going to do in Office Hours 2.0 is we have all the ISOs of everybody. For instance, this grid in 2.0 will be formed by Zoom OSC. So it'll literally, the grid here will be changed. It'll be the last 16 people that talked. I don't have a person figuring that out. Like I have an algorithm figuring out like who talked last, and I'll put, and constantly be rearranging and lock some people into place and then rearrange other folks. And then also it's like, for instance, super sources, as when the new panelist view pops up, panelists will raise their hand, like Ken's raising his hand right now physically. They won't have to do that. They'll raise it in the back end. That super source will get generated by Zoom OSC based on the host picking those hands. So there's a bunch of things these are very, very simple ways to do it. But you can imagine as that starts to scale, we can start figuring out, for instance, who should it, like it could decide, like recommend who would be the best one to answer it, so on and so forth. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, you can really see the growth and the power of AI in photo editing programs. That's when you really can see it. When you have to, you circle something to remove this object from a scene, and miraculously the background of that scene has been repainted in.
I mean, we're really now moving. Our cameras now are not. It's computational photography. You know what you're looking at on your iPhone. It's making that up, which is what we do. You know, our eyes are making stuff up. We just have a random stuff out there, and then we slowly turn it into something that we call images. Go ahead, Jonas.
What I think why, especially machine learning, will come a lot more to production is since it's already there. Like how machine learning works, it's working great with pixels. And I think there will be a lot more programs that help people. Like, for example, you wouldn't cut to a specific input anymore, but you would like to a specific thing that you want. Like, hey, I have one input that produces great audience shots. That's no longer an operator. That's a PDC camera scanning the audience for like a great shot. And you're like, okay, I'll want to take that, but it's still your decision.
Right. And one of the things that, like, for instance, we're looking at is using, again, Zoom OSC to feed the Atem. And so channels 1 through 8 are not the first 8 inputs of what we're sending it. It's the 8 people that you're most likely to want to cut to, you know, for different questions or whatever, constantly kind of moving those around. Go ahead, Chris.
In the summer of 1986, I got hired to work for Hewlett Packard for 6 weeks, I think it was. And all we did, 8 hours a day, was we recorded seminars from a guy named Vipin Kumar, who was like the father of artificial intelligence. And 35 years later, when I buy something on Amazon, every social media thing that I have for the next 3 days tries to sell me the thing I just bought.
Yeah.
Where is artificial intelligence? I know. I'm serious. I'm serious.
No.
So,
So
depending on how you define the word intelligence, it's never going to happen.
Well, the thing is that what I find is that when we use it really well is when it is helping a human make a final decision. When it's left to its own devices, it's not very good. You know, like, it just doesn't do it very, very well. When a human, like, so for, you know, when we're like, for instance, one of the things that we had in a previous version of Makana was if the AI saw 5 questions that it thought were the same, you know, this is the same rough question, it would throw it up in front of someone and say, I think all these 5 are the same. Are they? And you pick the ones that look like they're the same and say, which one should be the hero question? And you click on one and it'll go, and it would send it out. So it would let you, but it didn't do it on its own. Like, it didn't try to figure it out on its own. It was serving up, they're looking at hundreds of questions and serving things up, going, hey boss, look, let me show you what I think is going on. So as a servant to the, you know, AI becomes very, very useful. What we haven't seen, even with, you know, companies that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on it, what we haven't seen is it being able to do that on its own.
Right.
You know,
and the reason you allowed a human to make that last decision is the human actually has intelligence.
Right.
I think AI most of the time is just, I don't want to work hard. Please make me a magic button so I can work less.
I also think that, I mean, we'll get into, we're not going to go metaphysics on this, but, you know, I think that computational power and intelligence are 2 very, very different things. And I don't think that we're ever going to reach a singularity. Like, I'm just flat out. So anyway, go ahead, Bill.
I'm interested in whether or not everybody still is struggling with this difference between AI and machine learning. And I know I've had a couple of conversations with my friend Phil Hodgetts about that. And he was the person who helped me understand the importance of metadata back in those early years. So I'm wondering if this would be a great second hour discussion, particularly at that level. Just what's the difference between AI
someone should put it, I think it's a great idea. Put it in the second hour. That's a great one for us to discuss. Alex?
I mean, the way I understand it is machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence in general. And also artificial intelligence is just intelligence, but not necessarily encoding meaning. Once we encode what things mean to us, and they can be encoded in some form so we can transmit meaning, why, then that will push things forward to a new generation of actual assistance or another form of life eventually.
And artificial intelligence it's easier to fund a company on artificial intelligence than algorithms. All right, next question.
Moving on to Rupert McRae again, our third one of his string of highly voted. What is the future of satellite in relation to TV for actual video signals? Thinking across the board, around the world, commercial or free-to-air broadcast and or backhaul.
Go ahead, Carl.
So that kind of satellite usage is one-to-many. So that's essentially a broadcast. That'll still be used no matter what. Whether television stations are going to be involved in using those satellites, but the one-to-many philosophy is still very important in the media landscape going forward.
In backhauls, there's just a lot of places that we can't go. Like we just can't. We don't have a cell signal. We don't have a wired signal. So there are definitely plenty of places for trucks. Now there's a lot less of them. So the truck business, the satellite truck business, has not been a good business to be in. You can buy. I don't know. There was a bloodletting a couple years ago, and we almost bought a sat truck because you could buy a sat truck with everything in it for about 15 grand. Something that had like $300,000 of gear in it, and you could just buy it for nothing because it just wasn't worth anything. So most of that has happened already. So we still have the satellite trucks that are out there. There's less demand for them because we have live views and we have other things to do the backhauls. So I think that from a transmission perspective, backhaul perspective, a lot of them have had bandwidth bucks put on them so that they're able to you're able to get 100 megs. High latency, but 100 megs up. So like we did the first 360 stream out of Utah for Facebook. We didn't even sell coverage. We had 2 sat trucks, uplinking a stitched version, out. So those are the kind of things that still make sense for satellite. And when we had a campaign that I was working on in 2016, and they kept on having problems with it because they were using live views and they were using the bandwidth and everything else. And I miraculously came in and fixed it because I just brought sat trucks. It makes a lot of things go away really fast. So I think they're still relevant. Also, if you want to get to places that don't have a lot of terrestrial content, like Africa, you put something, or Asia. Like if you put something up on AsiaSat 5 unencrypted, you can reach 2 billion people, or at least 500 million. Really fast, and that's relatively inexpensive. We're talking about, $400 an hour to put something on AsiaSat 5 and reach potentially 2 billion people if it's unencrypted. Because even if you're somewhere that you're not allowed to do that, people have satellite dishes. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So about 10 years ago, I got to talk to somebody who actually made these they're actually pretty cool satellites. They want to get them as small as the size of a Rubik's Cube. They're a little bit bigger right now, but this is the reason why Jeff Bezos is actually going up into space to see how he can send satellites up there. And the whole idea is these little micro satellites are going to be thrown across space that are going to self-destroy eventually, but they'll actually cover the whole planet and then some for us to get our free to air, our internet, and everything like that.
Elon Musk has gotten pretty far in that process. We're watching a really interesting billionaires game between 3 people. It's kind of a fun thing to watch. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was gonna say Elon's got they're approaching 70,000 concurrent users right now at $100 a month. So if possibly through this platform, if I could get a bunch of you to send me $100 a month, there's enough of you.
Will you send up a satellite for us? Will you send up a satellite?
Anyway, I do think traditional satellite still has a lot of legs because there's just still a lot of places that are hard to get to, and I think that it will continue to have that for a little while. Next question.
We're moving on. In this case, it's David Brady in New York who's next. And one of our newer builds at the plant is using Evertz Nucleus for our dedicated video LAN. Does the panel have any experience or feedback on what the learning curve for that might be?
The only question I have related to that, is it Evertz or is it Evertz?
Yeah, I didn't know how to pronounce it either. I was guessing.
Evertz or Evertz. I that's all I have to ask. Every time we talk about it, when we talk about them, everybody has a different way of saying it. so maybe someday someone will pop up and let us know. I have not used Nucleus. It would be something that would be fun if we think that it would be a good second hour. Put it in the second hour and put a vote. I can easily get folks to come talk about it, but I just don't know. I don't know anything about it. I think we've missed David. You've gone over our head here. Doesn't happen very often that we can't field a question, but that one we'll have to bring some specialists in to talk about it. Next question.
Okay, we're back to our friend Rupert McRae in Dallas, who says the moving picture experts group, MPEG, has been very quiet for the last year with very few articles, news, or events on their website. What's their position in the industry and how are they related to SMPTE?
Go ahead, Carl.
Well, they're in an ISO working group, so that's where they come under. So they're allowed to make standards, and people are allowed to take those standards. They generally have long gaps between drinks. So I've noticed that in the industry too. They'll have these long gaps where there's people putting up papers, people doing research, and then all of a sudden at one of their conferences, they'll come out with 14 things at once.
Well, remember that MPEG also holds patents. So this is, so the MPEG consortium is selling you something, while the SMPTE consortium is building standards. So the one's an organization that builds it. The other one is actually selling something. So H.264 is an MPEG standard. H.265, H.266, which is what they're working on right now, is these are all standards that they then have to try to sell. And the reason that they kind of go into this, you can't keep selling 265. You won't be able to sell 265 if 266 is almost on the way out. So there's a problem where you tend to, there's a bunch of movement trying to get people to do the next version when they had 264 and 265. And that's all, a lot of that's negotiation. The reason that it's so hard to watch HDR on a Windows platform is because Microsoft doesn't want to pay for the H.265. It's a, they want to have you pay for it, like $1 or something, but it adds up a lot if they have to pay for it. So anyway, but Apple's decided to pay for it. And so that's why it's easy for us to move around and do things that we need to. But so there's a big push back and forth. VP9 is Google doesn't want to pay for H.265 or H.264 or H.265. VP9 is like, we don't want to pay for those licensing. So, and it's a good platform format, but it's Google trying to work around those things. So you have these folks that are building these new technologies, and then you have people who don't want to pay for it, people who do want to pay for it. And so that's what MPEG does. And then SMPTE is trying to have us all just get along. How do we all have something that we can all work with? Next question.
Leading to the old joke, the great thing about standards is that everybody has a different one.
Yeah.
Rupert McRae is back. Ross Video has updated its SRG 4500 time generator to include support for precision time protocol, PTP. Unlike network time protocol, NTP, PTP can achieve accuracy in the sub-microsecond range. Is PTP seen in the wild in production anywhere?
I have not seen it in the wild. So I haven't seen it yet. So I don't know. It's not been something that most of the time we're not even trying to get to that level of time protocol for most of the stuff that we're doing in streaming. So, both of those, NTP is what we've used for a long time if we needed to do that. And PTP, I haven't seen. I don't know if anyone else has seen it in the wild, but it's a good question. Next question.
Tony Mobley's asking the tough ones. Are we going to sing happy birthday to Schy?
Is it Sky's birthday?
It's Schy's birthday.
All right.
What?
All right. Hold on.
No.
Here we go. Ready?
Holding.
I'll start it.
Is anybody conducting?
There we go. Happy
birthday to you.
Happy
birthday to you.
Happy
birthday, dear Schy. Gleason in Seattle. Happy birthday to you.
Many more. I like that, Jeffrey.
That was good.
Cha-cha-cha. Thank
Go
you
ahead,
very
Jonas.
much. Well, this is a great community. I am blessed to be here. This past year, you have given me a gift. I don't know as I need anymore. That's
we gave you a gift this last year. We took it all away when we sang you happy birthday.
Hey, Jeffrey,
Jonas?
what is that instrument called? I need
Ratchet. I believe it's
no, it's not the ratchet. It is. I can't think of it.
Vibra
I can't think
Put
of
it
it.
in Mukana.
Yeah, it's Vibra Yes.
Vibra
that's
Slap.
it, yes.
Jonas.
Anyway, that shows up on the next remotes thing, and I was trying to think of whether I put in the credits.
Go, Jonas.
Did it sound for you all so strange? Because for me, it was totally different than everything before. I was hearing 3 or 4 voices, maybe even, and then it stopped, like broke down, and then it went in again, and it never sounded like that before. So maybe that's also a new
Well,
thing.
Zoom was using artificial intelligence to decide whose mic to make most prominent.
Maybe who was more in tune? No, not those ones. So anyway, next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, when you are lighting for streaming or broadcast, what considerations come into play versus lighting for purely an in-person event?
Go ahead, Carl.
So I've photographed a lot of conferences and a lot of things at a lot of stage events. White point. Just make sure your white lights are all the same type of white, be it, 5600. It's even if it's 3200, just make sure they're all the same white. I've had conferences where I've had someone at the lectern who's at like 6500, the panel at 3200, and the people on the microphone are 5500. So I have to change. Well, when I edit the photos, I have to change everything.
Yeah, and the thing is that folks that do lighting for only concerts or only events don't think about that way. They don't think about cameras, and so they'll do one part of the show is at 7600, and the other part's at 5600, and the other part's at 8600, and the other part, and so you have to talk through them like, hey, can't keep changing that. Like we have and so that's one consideration. Another consideration is your blacks. Things that look dark on stage will look black on a stream because you have to remember that the compression isn't going to make those changes well. Go ahead, Alex.
And there's also the color temperature of the projection or the LEDs and all that kind of stuff that causes problems too, which is often different from the lighting.
There are things, LEDs, mostly blink slower when they are to get them to a lower level. So if someone wants a low level LED and it's a cheap one and it starts with a low refresh rate, when they lower it, we see rippling, on our stream. We see these like little rippling going up, or we see it literally flashing, on the screen. And so you have to worry about that, so in a way that you don't have to worry about when you're just doing live events. And so you have to really think about how those cameras are going to work from a lighting perspective. I think those are some of the biggest things that we worry about. But some of it gets better as you start to do HDR. Some of those color spaces and everything else you can actually support, because you're not in such a small window. You have usually 10 times the space to work with. And so some of that color space stuff changes a little bit as you move out of SDR, but we're still in an SDR world for a little while longer. Go ahead, Bill.
One of the things that I appreciate is the fact that this frame is fixed for me, and it's fixed for most of the panelists now. So if you light that once and get it right once, you're done. In the other part of the world, if somebody's changing their orientation, moving around on a stage or something like that, it's really hard to light them consistently unless they hit their marks perfectly.
Well, and one thing that you have to understand is that you need to shade the cameras. For a live event that you're streaming on stage, you need to make sure that someone's there to able to in real time change that exposure. And it's not a little. It's not like, oh, you can let the camera operators do it. They're trying to keep everything in focus. You have somebody else there with big knobs that are just literally looking at the current frame and the next one and making sure that they match together. And it's a pretty stressful job in a lot of events to keep those colors the same. Not colors, but exposure. You don't change the color during it. Go ahead, Chris.
Sometimes you do.
You shouldn't.
Change the color. Yeah, I mean, if you ever get, what I was going to say is if you ever get a chance, and it's not likely, but if you ever get a chance to watch somebody shading cameras during an NFL game at sunset, it's magical.
Or
those guys are incredible.
The one that's the hardest that they don't always get right, and you can see the limitations of SDR, is when the open-ended stadiums get cut in half with the sun is a nightmare for someone who's shading, because they have to choose like which wins and which doesn't, and you're going to cut the one shot, like literally a runner. You'll see it happen. A runner will run out of the shade into the sun, and they might. And if there's a handful of shading operators that will get that right. Like you'll see the whole sky go darker just as they come out of it, because they're watching them, and as soon as they come out, they're pulling it down to get that data out. And a lot of times the directors are going to cut to close-ups that don't require you. What they don't want to do is show you a wide shot of them changing the color, but they invariably will cut to it in the middle of action, and you'll see it really blown out for a second. And again, that's where HDR becomes really cool. In that area, you have a lot more room to work. Next question.
Comes to us from Philip Oler in Katona, New York, and he says, anyone else have issues getting the Atem Photoshop plugin to show up? Running Big Sur on an M1 Mac Mini and Photoshop 2021, the plugin appears incorrect location, but not in the export list.
I don't know if you're, the one thing that I would do to make sure that you get it right is to export, or make sure to reinstall the plugin, or reinstall all of the Atem software. So uninstall it, don't try to move it, uninstall it and then reinstall it. And usually there's something about that process that you think that it's all there and something is missing. So I would highly recommend reinstalling it and seeing if that fixes the problem. Next question.
Harry Block in Tel Aviv, Israel is up next with, when screen scraping Zoom from one PC, sending it over to production via NDI, and then sending the program back out to the same Zoom meeting, it bleeds color and washes out. I believe this has been mentioned here before. Why is this, and how do I avoid it?
It's what we would kind of refer to as a double LUT. You know, Zoom does its own color correction to our, you know, to what's happening. So it thinks it's trying to make it better. There's not, even though you turn off improve or whatever, there's no like just pass it through the way it was. It's interesting that it doesn't, yeah. So what you need to do if you're only going to Zoom is to have a proc amp somewhere in there that you can make adjustments to the image. And then what you do is you have both images, you know, you see the image that was going out and soon the image that's coming in, and you sit there and you change you use a proc amp to change the actual exposure and color so that both of them match. And then you have to run it. Now, if you're going out to a stream, it's different again. So you have to be careful of that. We've been dealing with that recently. Go ahead, Rupert.
So if you're screen scraping, you are capturing the signal coming out of your graphics driver, and you could have the settings in that set up all one way, and your monitor could be set up in a different way. So it may not, your computer may not be necessarily outputting what your monitor is seeing, because you may have your colors set one way on your monitor. So I'd suggest set your graphics drivers to default, so it resets all those settings, and maybe your monitor too. And then you'll know that you're going to screen scrape the most realistic signal out of the computer.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says, when running multiple traffic types, Dante, SoundGrid, NDI, sACN, ArtNet, over a switch, is it best to have separate VLANs? I know SoundGrid requires a separate VLAN or switch, but can other standards mix with general traffic? And he notes web access, email, and so forth.
I would generally slice most of those out into their own networks, you know, their own VLANs. Having them intermingle between each other, you have to keep track of how much bandwidth is being used by each one, but having them all intermingling along the same path is, I would, like for SoundGrid, NDI, Dante, yeah, all four of the ones that you have there, I would separate them into 4 separate VLANs if it was me. Rupert?
Yeah, so VLANs will always give you some good logical separation, but bear in mind it is all at the end of the day still going across the same switch. So VLANs inherently don't give you any prioritization. That would be the next level of configuration after that. You set up your VLANs and then you go into your switch or your network or whatever and set up your prioritization.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Comes from, looks like Andre Doll in Berlin. What is the most cost-effective and reliable way for a streaming backup when the provided LAN is maybe not fast enough? How do you set up so that the backup takes over immediately and he's streaming with an Atem Extreme to Vimeo?
Yeah, go ahead, Rupert.
So you need to go through some kind of device that's going to have that high availability. So a router that can accept 2 connections, you have to figure out what your second connection is going to be. If your first connection doesn't have enough bandwidth in the first place, then you maybe want to look at some load balancing, and you can use Speedify maybe for that. But you've really got to look at how quickly your router will switch over is one thing. How quickly your streaming destination will accept the stream from a different IP address is a different period of time. So you'll just want to test it, but it's going to be at a router level. You could use, you know, the Ubiquiti stuff, or PepWave can do some stuff in this area, or anything that can accept 2 connections. But if your first connection can't provide the bandwidth in the first place, then I'd try and look at a more robust solution.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, you can search on SD-WAN or dual WAN. I know Linksys makes a dual WAN system that will switch over to another device. I have an SD-WAN here that'll also send 2E streaming if I set up to my phone or another streaming device. And of course, I have 2 LANs coming on here. There is going to be a small little blip when it does switch over, but it definitely sends little packets to the other through the other network to make sure that it's running.
One of the things also is to consider having something that's going to, if you don't have a separate connection. So a lot of these are like, well, you have to have a cell connection or you have to have another connection. If you don't have that, that's where devices like, and this is the cheapest way to go, but a device like the Elemental Link will help you because it's using Zixi. It's the cheapest way to put Zixi into your pipeline, where you can actually give it a signal, and rather than streaming out of your Atem, you give it a signal and it's going to use Zixi to get to the cloud. Once it's in AWS, it's going to be pretty stable. And so like what we've done is we just send 2 of those out. We bond them, not bond them, but we can turn one on. If we have enough bandwidth, turn both on. The reason that Zixi is important is that it manages low bandwidth and turbulent bandwidth very well. So it's the best that we've seen so far in being able to expand and contract You know, so like when you have a link, you set it up and you don't say I'm viewing 20 megs a second. It's up to 20 or up to 50 megs a second, you know, and then the Zixi will figure out how much can I use, and it breaks most of the rules of the internet to do that. So if everybody used Zixi, we would all be in trouble. but hey, our video matters. So we put it in and we let it do its thing. It's what we tend to call reliable UDP. SRT is similar to it, but we haven't found that SRT is as flexible with low bandwidth situations as Zixi is. Next question.
Comes from Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand. Peter says, PSA for Alex and so forth, the new Magic Radio just dropped from Teenage Engineering. It's not cheap, but definitely worth it, he says, and he has a link there.
Magic Radio. I don't even know what that would be. It's a Magic Radio. I don't even understand what I'm looking at. I guess it's
It's a high quality portable speaker.
Okay, cool. Nice. All right, next question.
Moving on, Larry Engelhart in Chicago, Illinois. When connecting a Canon video camera to an Atem Mini Pro, the video keeps blinking. He's tried it with 2 different cameras. Any ideas as to what could be going on?
Go ahead, Carl.
So it's a HDMI CEC. So what happens is when you hook up your camera to a television, you can actually use the television to actually stop, start, rewind, fast forward. So transport controls. The Atem also sends signals like camera shading, but these signals the camera doesn't understand. So what's happening is the Canon camera is going, I'm hearing signals, and it's probably trying to start and stop recording, because one of the things that it actually has on most Canon video cameras is record. So you'll need to go into settings, you'll need to go and record, and you want to turn that feature off. The ability to record from an external device. That's probably the one that's triggering it. That's why it's flashing, because it's going to record mode and, or going back to playback mode, because the thing is trying to play back. So it's just getting really confused.
Next question.
David Brady of New York's up next with on my company Zoom account. Zoom calendar invites do not default to add to my Outlook calendar. Is there a way to associate the .ics files quick and easy to open in Outlook?
I think that you can, if someone creates a Zoom meeting and invites you, it will do it correctly. Where if you're invited to a Zoom meeting, it should just show up in your calendar. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
The problem is more, I think, on Zoom's end, because whatever you do on Zoom, it has to ask for permission to go to any of the calendars, Google or whatever. And so I think that they need to do something on Zoom and to get that to work. But yeah, otherwise it's just going to keep dark.
I know that we do it. I mean, people do it directly. They connect it directly to, Google, because the problem with Google is that you have to be very careful when it creates that, because Google will put the Zoom link in, but it'll automatically add a Google Meet link. And so we've had issues where half the people that were there just saw the first link that showed up. And so you have to go in after you've created it as the creator and go in and delete that. Otherwise you'll end up, everyone, half your group will just they'll go to the first link that they see, which will be the Meet one. Angela?
That's what I was going to say. We do Zoom links all the time using Google, and it works out great as long as you remember the Meet issue.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, there is a plugin for Outlook directly for the scheduling. So it's on the Zoom page. If you go into your account, you'll see you can save the scheduling time to the Outlook plugin. That might help.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. And Douglas says, I've heard it mentioned that satellite uplinks are commonly used for live broadcast events like concerts. How would you split the raw audio for the broadcast mix? And what audio format would the uplink encoder expect?
Uplink encoder will take up to 16 channels of audio. It just takes the SDI that you have and it'll just push it up. So you can put 16 channels of audio, and we've done that for translations and all kinds of other, and even other things. And so you can absolutely, it will take anything the SDI signal will take and encode it into a transport stream. So it just depends on, and it can be an MPEG 4, MPEG 2. Both of those are things that are supported by most satellite trucks, and generally all those channels will be supported. You oftentimes have to define them. So you'll tell someone it's an 8-channel or a 4-channel, and there are some trucks that we've worked with that are limited to 8 channels. But generally you can just pack them all on. When they come out the decoder on the other end, all those channels will be just available on the SDI, embedded into it as it would be in a regular system. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back. In comments to the FCC regarding moving from C-band satellite to fiber, one comment was that there'd be a decrease in reliability. Wouldn't a network connection be a more reliable process because of immunity to atmospheric connection conditions?
I guess we've covered satellite a lot, but C-band is pretty resilient to atmospheric conditions, and Ka and Ku bands are more susceptible to atmosphere. But on the whole, I mean, given the changing landscape of satellite, like we've talked about, satellite is often used in vulnerable situations, in desolate situations where even if you do have fiber, it may just be one. And I've known fiber to be damaged, a fiber line to be cut way more times than I've known a satellite connection to go down. You've also got to look at disaster situations. I mean, in Florida right now, they've got a mess, and they've got sat trucks all over the place there because the local infrastructure is either desecrated or overloaded. So you just get a sat in there and punch out of all that stuff. Now, if they take that bandwidth away, you're back into all of those problems.
Yeah. And you're, oops, bless you. Anyway, the C-band is, we've had very few times. I mean, it really takes a lot of atmospheric condition for a C-band. For Ku, Ka, it needs to be foggy. Ku, hard rain will be enough to break it up. And we've seen that. And but C-band is something that generally will cut through almost everything, except for, literally, tropical storms, and even then I think it would probably handle it pretty well. I think hurricanes, it probably wouldn't, but it literally, it'll handle a lot. The best, of course, is fiber and satellite. But I do think that C-band, if someone said you only have one connection out and it can be fiber or C-band and prices were equal, I would take a C-band every time. Next question.
Moving on to the seventh scroll in book. Oh, hi, guys. Would you guys suggest using a PTZ option behind a teleprompter setup, or would you use it separately?
Go ahead, Carl.
Need a little bit more understanding of context, because in a studio environment, you may have like a robotic pedestal, PTZ, teleprompter, so that's common. But for office hours setup, so for like a teleconference setup, maybe if you need to point that camera and you need it to be like it's a turnkey operation for the person sitting in front of it, maybe so you can frame them perfectly. Maybe that's a good idea. But
you're a little limited for a PTZ. You can't turn it very much because you're going to hit the sides of the teleprompter. So you can definitely make fine adjustments. You can zoom in. You can, especially if you zoom in, you can pan back and forth. It might be 15, 20, 30 degrees, depending on what your zoom level is. And so we've definitely put them into studios where we have PTZs inside of they're also, you can't attach them the same way. So when you put a teleprompter in, there are, if you look at prompter people, I believe they make ones that just go around the PTZ that completely encase it in black. But because with a regular teleprompter, we're kind of cinching it up on the lens, and we can't do that. So there are specific cases for it to put it in to have that work. In general, it can work, and we've definitely done it. A lot of times we've taken smaller PTZs or smaller teleprompters, 15-inch teleprompters, and if the teleprompt head is strong enough, you put it on the teleprompter. So like if we use a telemetrics head we've used a telemetric head with an Ursa and a Fujinon Cabrio lens, and in that case we put the teleprompter actually on it, and the telemetrics head was just strong enough to hold all of it together, and that's the best way to do it. Otherwise you need the case, and again you have to kind of think about what you're working with. Next question.
Larry Englehart in Chicago is back with this one. I have embedded several MP4 videos in PowerPoint to present on a webcast. When playing back the PowerPoint, the audio is clearly out of sync. 1, can the PowerPoint be repaired? And 2, is there a better way to create a webcast flow with several MP4s?
Good, Carl.
So MP4 is just a wrapper. So unfortunately, unknowing what the actual file format is inside, so it could be a long GOP. Long GOP could have an issue with sync. So if your MPEG-4 is actually a long GOP inside that PowerPoint, you may have sync issues. I would suggest doing an all-I or something as high a bit rate as possible to put into that particular presentation as a starter for future. But you'd probably have to upgrade your video file to something new if you're going to repair that particular PowerPoint.
Go to Angela.
The biggest thing is also how long is it? Those video files, PowerPoint doesn't like anything that's over 2.5 minutes. So once you start getting to that limit, it does weird things for all different reasons.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I would highly recommend not embedding them in PowerPoint, having the videos as separate. That's the best way of doing it, I believe.
Almost all of us that do, high level presentations, very quickly, the first thing that you do is you pull all the videos out of the presentation. You don't try to play them inside of it. And that's even with Keynote, which handles videos much better than PowerPoint. If you're doing a small presentation in a conference room, it's fine to embed them because you don't have the system to do that. If you're doing a webcast and you start to decide that you really want to push this, that's where you need a little switcher. This is where the Atem Mini works really well, is you have a second computer that has all the videos using a playback system like Playoutbee or Playoutbee would probably be perfect for what you're doing here with an Atem, but also MIDI or QLab, or many of us will use one of those types of devices that are going to play out the videos alone. And so then you cut to it and play it out. And you're just going to find that that's going to save you a lot of time. Now, you can try to embed it. I will say that if you're on a Mac, the secret to many presentations up until a couple of years ago when it became publicized and somebody ruined it for all of us, is no matter what you gave us, if you gave us a Google Slides or gave us Microsoft PowerPoint or whatever, it all ended up on a Mac with Keynote. Like people just, literally from 2008 until probably 2016, there was a good sunny 8 years where everything we worked on, no matter who they were, was getting done in Keynote because it was just not stable. PowerPoint wasn't, or slides wasn't considered as good. And they'd always say, you'd have these presenters going, wow, the screen makes the thing look so much better and everything works so much better than what I'm used to. And we were like, oh yeah, it's just a lot of hardware, and you try to talk it through. They go back to their HP laptop and try to figure out how to make it look that good. Go ahead, Alex.
In case other people don't know, you can, if you rename some of the files, PowerPoint and Keynote to .zip or ZIP, then you can extract any embedded videos and actually get them out of the videos that are built into these things. Because sometimes
you just rename them zip.
Yeah, .zip in the case of a PTX file. You can rename it .zip and then extract it. And then you can get all the MP4s and any videos or any media of any kind out of them.
There's the tip for the day. Wow, that's great. All right. All right. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back again. And he asked this time, for those who have worked in the concert business specifically, what has been the most interesting request you've seen on a rider?
Go ahead, Carl.
I believe there was this band called Spinal Tap. They had problems on their rider with miniature bread.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I've been in many venues and many different writers, and I've been thinking about this for a couple of questions. I think the one that really stands out is the band Guar, and we won't talk about who they are because it's kind of not safe. But they asked for the ability to have enough plastic to cover the stage and the first 4 rows of the audience. So other than that, yeah, a lot of green M&Ms, cutting off the crusts on bread and things like that. That's usually what I would see in a writer.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, go ahead, Angela.
I got 4 batches of Nicorette, and it was just like, oh, they're out of Nicorette, so they want to make sure that they don't have to buy it.
I wasn't a writer, but there was a band out of Seattle called Screaming Trees, and I took one of them to get shoes that I work for Sony, and so this wasn't a writer, but I took one of them to get new Vans before the show, and so that was, and he was really big, and so my little car literally like leaned to one side as we went over and got them, and then I took the other one to the airport. We got lost, so Mark Lanigan and I wandered around in the middle of Pittsburgh trying to figure out how to get to the airport, so that was not a one, but they're really good, and I don't think they had anything on their. They didn't have a lot on their rider, but they did have a lot of requests. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, writers are the source of a lot of punchlines. But if you think about it, these are people that have been away from home, sometimes for months or in certain cases, years. And there's just certain things. It's like, I don't want to get in an argument over what beer or soda or towel.
The big thing is that people are paying a lot of money to be there. And their state of mind is everything. When you look at a writer, you just have to realize that they are being sometimes particular and everything else, but their state of mind is what you're paying for, of them being able to perform and do what they do, the magic that they do. Otherwise, anybody could do it. And so, anybody, a cover band could do them. It could do that if they didn't, so you want them to be comfortable. And to Chris's point, a lot of times you're city number 40 for them, and they just need it to work, and these are the things that they need as they go through, and they have to think about it ahead of time usually, because those riders are done months in advance. They don't get to say, well, I'm going to change what I need for the next show. They just think of it. They just like the kitchen sink. Okay, we're going to move on because we're running out of time. For those of you here for the keynote one, we'll run about 10 minutes over, and then we'll get into the conversation, but we're going to buzz through the last questions. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael next. With the LED fixtures like the ETC Source 4 LED, would there still be many venues that use traditional gelled fixtures? And he's got a link.
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so like RE Sky panels in their orbit system now has a Roscoe colors built in, so you can actually dial up a Roscoe color. So these companies are actually working with them to make sure their colors actually match their gels.
I mean, there's still some you see, but usually every time, as soon as they upgrade their lights, it's gone. The gels are kind of disappearing. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael again, this time hum and noise issues with the attaching synth to my audio interface when they're on separate outlets. I have a trip light isolation transformer. Would it be best to have a common power source for all devices?
Go ahead, Rupert.
Putting them on a common source may be a valid troubleshooting technique. You want to watch out on your load and everything like that, but so can isolation transformers. But really, quite often, you want to look at common grounds too. But before I go connecting grounds together, I usually measure the difference just to see if there's anything crazy going on.
Go ahead, Carl.
So if you're using like a 1/4 inch TRS out of your synthesizer, it won't go into an audio interface because it's expecting a TRS balanced, and your synthesizer won't be balanced. So I'd always suggest using a Y splitter out of the headphone jack of your synthesizer into 2 channels of your audio interface. It'll work every time.
Nice. Next question.
Talak Miguel Lopez Waterman, our friend here on the panel often. What is it about Zixi that is flexible with low bandwidth?
The algorithm. So it's that we should do it. Someone should put it in there for a second hour. I think I might be able to get the CTO from Zixi to come on and explain it all to us. But basically it is just checking for those. It's checking for the packets, and it's doing smart scaling, as it works through that. And so, but I probably am not the best person to describe it, but we can probably get someone from Zixi to come on and join us. So, let someone put that in the second hour, and we'll break it all down for everybody. Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles says, what's the highest quality method to share a video using an Atem Mini via a non-webinar Zoom call?
Go ahead, Carl.
If you have the Pro or above the streaming bridge.
There you go. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says a lighting rider specified 15 one-ton motor points. Would a motor point be basically a hoist like a CM Lodestar, along with a chain and other rigging to hang things from it?
Go ahead, Carl.
That's exactly right. So this is what they look like. So this is probably about 30 or 40 of them. So the black thing in the corner there, it's a little motor. It goes up and down on the chain. That's how they can bring the lighting rigs up and down.
Yeah, and those come in, typically we see them in 500 pound, 1,000 pound, 2,000 pound will be a 1 ton. And so you want to know obviously how much weight that thing's going to pull, so that you don't pull the ceiling down. So it's always a good thing. But those load points are, typically when you get a drawing, you'll ask for a DWG or some kind of CAD drawing from a venue, and most large venues will have those. And then and they tell you what those weights are, is usually on some kind of spreadsheet. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back with one comment in favor of retaining satellite-based content distribution was universal availability in rural areas. Wouldn't it be harder to find technical talent willing to live in rural areas, especially in the U.S.?
Go ahead, Rupert.
So if we're talking about broadcast, installing customer premise equipment for broadcast TV satellite is not that difficult. It's there'd be plenty of availability of that. If you're talking about more specialized expertise, then if you're specialized and out in a rural area, that's a lucrative market.
You'd be surprised. Like every TV station for the last 50 years has had satellite. There's a lot of people out there that know how to use it. Now, some of them don't. They don't. They just have a satellite there that runs. Like once it gets set up, it can stay there. If it's not having to change satellites, it may not get changed for a decade. Like literally, it's just pointing there and it doesn't move, and it's just fine. So that's not usually a problem. And the rest of them are trucks, and these folks drive all over the U.S. with their trucks, and oftentimes spend too much time in their trucks by themselves. It's just like they're in their own little world when you talk to them. But they that's all they think about is the signals. But they really know their business. The guys who show up with trucks somewhere are brilliant. I mean, they just know so much about it. I sit around in the truck all the time and hang out with them and just try to suck up as much information as I can, because they know everything about those transmitters and everything else, especially in Africa. It's amazing. Like the African transmission guys know more than anyone else. I've never seen anybody that knows as much, because they have so many crazy things they're asked to do in so many difficult situations. We worked with these uplinks in Nigeria, and they were just, I mean, holy smokes, were they complicated, and those guys just nailed it. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back again with, when I look at resellers for some vendors, like Cisco, for example, in some areas, they seem to be focused on integration and don't have online ordering, like, for example, CDW. Would one be able to find box and contract resellers everywhere if one looked hard enough?
Go ahead, Rupert.
The thing is that the integration and all the professional services side of it is how they make their money. There's very little margin in anything else. So, I mean, you can find it out there, but it's not going to be as extensive as the integrators.
Yeah. Next question.
Douglas again with, in the writer for a well-known classic rock act, it specified that a cylinder of oxygen be located at stage right, and this is important for performances in high heat, humidity, altitude locations. Is that a common request?
Carl.
I think that these classic rock acts have members who were born during the Second World War. Not having oxygen there would be irresponsible, I think.
Jeffrey, real quick.
Not in Wisconsin.
Next
Maybe
question.
Colorado.
Mustard gas survivor. Hasmuk says from Cape Town, Nanlite B68 is quite affordable. Mix panel 60 and 150 has clouded the options. MIP 150 is not an option now, but MP60 is an option. Compared to the B68 outside of DMX, why is MP60 a better option? Prefer to cry once after a buy. That was so much fun to read.
So I have both of them. So I have a bunch of we have, I don't know, 20 or 30 of the 68Bs, and then I have probably 4 or 5 of the mix panels that I use. And now I will say that I'm using the 100s in front of me, the 100Bs, and then I have what's putting the light up behind me is actually a mix panel, just because it was available for me. And so there's a couple advantages. One is it's a lot more rugged. It has a yoked attachment, so you can swing it around a fair bit. It's a lot easier to use with it as far as pointing it. It does all the colors, so it's not just 32 to 56 or whatever. It is actually red, green, blue. You can see that back there. So it does the colors. It has DMX, and I wouldn't buy anything without DMX at this point for something I'm going to put into the ceiling. Something like this that I'm sitting down in, it's fine, but it's something that I might want to work with, and the next version of this will all be DMX. To make sure it works. And so the DMX makes it much easier to use. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I know I do keep going on about them, but the Aperture Nova P300Cs, if you buy the kit, then they come in a Pelican case. They're DMX, they have the best app to control them. They're not, they are definitely a cry once, buy once solution.
I think they're a little bit more than the Nanlites. I think that they're
a lot more.
Yeah, a lot more. Yeah. So that that's where the Nanlite has for me has, I think that the Aperture has a better, much better remote control than the Nanlites do. Once you get into the software, it's just that you're paying for that. And so far I haven't been ready to pay for the delta between Nanlite and Aperture because we're buying so many lights, and so that's been the difference. But I do think that the Aperture has a better software control. So if that's something that's important to you, but I would stick with DMX if I can. But you can, definitely light a bunch of stuff up with the 68s are great as well. Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles wonders if anybody has comments, good or bad, about the app Mix 16 Go for audio.
I don't know if we know what it is. Has anyone seen it before? I guess we don't have a comment on it. Next question.
Moving on, Douglas Carmichael. Again, what are the lines of demarcation between the tour, production, and artist managers on a concert tour?
Go ahead, Carl.
They can actually have different bosses sometimes as well. So you can have a promotion company actually in charge of the tour manager. or they'll be part of the production company, of course. The artist manager is the artist manager. And production manager will usually be hired by the touring company or the touring company. So they've actually got 3 separate bosses. They're kind of like 3 separate companies, with the band being one of those companies. So they kind of have to work in unison. They're not all part of the same company with different job titles or job tasks. So they're actually 3 different companies doing 3 completely different jobs to get the band up on stage.
By the way, I just looked at the Mix Pro, the Mix 16 Pro. It looks really cool. So anyway, if you ever want to advertise something to us, you just go, "Have you ever thought about this?" And you're like, "Oh yeah, that looks good." I'll probably purchase it and we'll play with it. We'll see if we like it. It's $50 for a playback system. Next question.
Good. The last of our non-keynote questions comes from Douglas Carmichael again. High-resolution LED walls seem to be stalwarts of outdoor events, but Barco, an old-time LED vendor, seems to be focused on their indoor products, as shown on their site. Has Barco become less dominant?
Go ahead, Carl.
So some manufacturers just focus on non-IP, so IP65. So we're talking about ingress protection. So they don't have any outdoor panels. I know American DJs only just started their line of outdoor panels for their video walls. They've got a whole big line of indoor panels, and that's because they're using a certain substrate. They're using a certain back plane for their panels, and the back plane is not designed for outdoors. You'd have to do a whole engineering to do an outdoor version. So it is a complete second version rather than just doing dot pitch changes, which is relatively easy. You can use the same back plane with electronics. When you go to IP outside, then IP stuff outside is going to be a completely different substrate, completely different electronics, completely different everything. So it's a re-engineering. So it's a separate line of products, not just an add-on.
And one of the things that Barco does is it's looking for where it makes itself different. So they're not, the outdoor ones are actually not very high resolution from our perspective. So Barco is really living in a lot of the stuff currently on their indoor products. The reason is you can't put them outside. You know, if you're at a 0.9 or a 1.2 or 1.7, it doesn't really, there's wind considerations. They're just too delicate. So, and it's everybody in China makes ones that are 2 and above. so you're really in a very competitive market. Go ahead, Rupert. And let's let Talak in. I think that he was raising his hand a little earlier.
Yeah, it just appears to me that Barco are going after the markets that they believe to be where the money is in the future.
You have to always look at what makes you different. And if it doesn't make you, if there's a lot of people in that area, unless you can compete, you really want to compete on cost, which can be brutal. You want to find a place that you're special, and so, Barco, has the technology to be special in the area of resolution and quality and so on and so forth, and probably not in cost effectiveness. So they've chosen their battles. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and shift. We are going to talk a couple minutes and set the pace before we jump into the questions. So if you have questions about Keynote, we're changing the subject matter here. And again, let's, did we get to lock in? I know he raised his hand.
I'm chatting with him. That was an error.
Oh, got it. Okay, great.
Copy.
So anyway, so we had talked about it a little on a Saturday, and then I think that it was requested that we talk about it in a place when we're recording. So we're going to talk a little bit about Keynote and kind of trade notes about how we use it. I have my own specific ways of using it, but I'd love to go around and talk to folks about how they put those things together. So who wants to talk a little bit about their Keynote process? And go ahead, Angela, and then Carl, and then Ken.
I've used it from anywhere from idea collection to storyboarding to creating the graphics part of a video play-on package for people to come on stage or come to whatever. I've done it as award announcements, like we had 150 awards. I build all the graphics. I export it as a movie. We add VO and music. It is one of the most useful tools I have, I think, whether it be editing, graphics, presenting, anything.
I do think it's funny that I consider it the most valuable app that I own, and I didn't have to pay anything for it. Like it is literally the thing that I make the most money on. So is my ability to use Keynote. Go ahead, Carl.
So I'm going to give you just a quick live demonstration of what I do when I'm reading the questions. So what I'll do is I'll quickly just pin myself here so I can see myself big, so I can see what I'm doing.
And again, as Carl and as Angela and Carl and Ken are doing this stuff, if you have questions that you're seeing here or questions that come up for Keynote, go ahead and throw them into Makana. Go ahead, Carl.
All right, so this is my template. So it simply just has a text box. And the background is, as I see here, it's just an advanced gradient that goes from white to black. So we'll start with that. So I'll have some images on the side. So let's drag in an image. So I've grabbed this image from B&H. I'll just drag it in, and it comes with a white background. So that's not a problem. So I'll get the image standards, but it doesn't really matter. So in formatting, you'll see your three. So image is one we want to go to, and instant alpha. Click on instant alpha, go to the white part. This is a black device on white background, so you can go probably 10% easy, give you a nice cut. And there's a nice cut. Make sure you hit done. Reset of the image, because it will give you a new frame around your image now. So resetting your image. Then in the text box, just quickly double click the text, put in what it is.
Oh, we got it in the middle there. It's hard to do when you're sitting in front of people. Go ahead, Bill, while he's typing.
Well, I just wanted to make the point. I think the reason that Keynote and this kind of program, but Keynote specifically, is so brilliant is that in communication, clearly what is being said if someone is live presenting is the most important thing you're hearing. That's where most of the information is going to be passed along. But to add visuals, and that can be video, it can be graphics, it can be text, it can be anything you want, to add that second stream of communication, to let them not just hear what you're saying and the emotion that you're saying it with, but to actually see what you're talking about, is one of the most powerful combinations possible. And this program, Keynote, just does that so simply and easily and well. It's built to do good text simply and quickly. You can bring almost anything into it. And when you're done, the control versus video of being able to cycle to the next point when you're ready in your presentation is gigantically powerful.
And one of the things to remember is that what it really shines is when you use it in what I would say is properly, which is, and when I say properly, what I mean is that you are showing people the content that you're talking about at that moment. You're not putting a bunch of text up. You're not putting a bunch of superfluous information up. You're not leaving things up for them to mull over. Things are coming up very fast. I mean, usually in a presentation that I'm doing, I'm often changing, unless people ask questions, I'm often changing every couple seconds. Something new is coming, popping up, and I'm showing it to you. That is, kind of how we approach it, and it's just a lot more effective. Go ahead, Angela.
So I've even used it as like the base for like a Malumin or something to throw it on different screens, and you have it all in one deck, and you can then image map what goes on what screen. Yeah. I have something. Oh, I can't
go ahead
share.
And make Angela co-host, and then she can share. While she's setting that up, go ahead, Brian.
A few months back, someone here on Office Hours mentioned that you could export alpha video from Keynote. And when I learned that, I went, oh my gosh, and used it for a big video editing project. Normally I would use After Effects or something like that to do the graphics. Yeah. But boy, did it speed it up. It's really fantastic for simple motion graphics.
That's the whole thing. I thought I'd be a little further along today, that I'd be able to show you something, but of course I had a little fire yesterday that put me off. But I'm going to do an elemental thing about this UHD video for YouTube next week. And as a challenge, I'm doing it all in Keynote, because I'm just I just want to push that envelope of doing it. And you really can. You can put all the stuff together and you can throw it, and make it go, much faster for educators, obviously for business communication, for all those things. It's a video production app as much as anything else. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that the way Apple indicates transparency it does a disservice to the app, because they don't indicate that the background is transparent. Yeah,
it's just black.
And I think that, I don't know if the checkerboard look is somehow patented by Adobe or something, but they really need to do that, because I've been what I consider an absolute Keynote power user since the day it was released.
Right.
And it took me way too long to realize that I could do full transparency out of it.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
No, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Angela. You were going to show something.
Yeah, so we did this one show where it was 2 LEDs, but it was one Keynote deck, and I was able to throw like a name play onto the bottom, which is, we usually had 2 seats when it wasn't like the main CEO talking. and we could throw the headshot up to the main screen so you could see it come large. So it was just one deck and things moving from screen to screen as just a quick, easy way to just image map.
So you're able to send it to one deck is sending it, or is it one computer sending it to two different screens?
It was
or is it two?
One deck sending it to like an Lumen, taking each grab and putting it into each screen.
That's great. Yeah. Go ahead, John, and then Ken.
My screen moved around. So Alex 4D for the win. Last week, he told us if you hold the Alt key down when you say save as comes back. I was so disappointed that save as was removed.
The one little trick that I use a lot when I'm building this out is I save everything to cloud, into my Keynote cloud document. And then I open it up in my, I'll have it. Things got a little crazy yesterday, but the iPad, I'll have it open in iPad plugged into my Extreme, and I'll be editing it on my iMac, and I just keep hitting save as I'm as I'm working on things. And within depending on how big the images are that I added, within a couple seconds, it's on the iPad. And so I can have, and that can be someone anywhere in the world, or I can have it anywhere else, but I can be saving that document and it'll automatically be updating it, on the other side. And so you can have two open that are by the same user, or you can share it and have someone else opening it, or you can use Keynote Live to do those things. And so there's a bunch of different ways of kind of tying those together under a single file. Next question.
That's exactly how I do it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's incredible. Now, one thing that I didn't talk about is, one thing that I don't have a good way to show it, but the process. I'm kind of curious before we jump into the questions, how people build their keynotes. I'll tell you how I build mine, and then you can. So mine is a very specific process. I start in notes. so I start in notes and I write down everything that I want to say. Here's why I don't go into Keynote first and open up and start putting images in is that you start picking colors and fonts and images and everything else, and you lose the story. Like you want to tell the story of what I want to say. What do I want to say here? And I sit there and I write it out in long notes. And anyone who's worked with me will just get this note thing that's almost everything I'm going to say. And I'll send it to them and we all talk about it. Oh, it'd be good if you added this. Before I start spending any time on the image, then I take those notes and I usually split screen it in my iPad. And I open up Keynote and I create a whole bunch of empty images. I just create 40 of them so I don't have to do it while I'm working. And then I draw. I sit there with my thing and I look at each one and I go, this is this slide, and I draw it really fast. Like I'm going to have this and I'm going to have that. Because the other thing is a lot of times I don't do things. I found that I don't do them. Oh, it's going to take too much time. I don't worry about that right now. Like how much time it's going to take me. Then I just draw things and I go, okay, the picture is going to come over here and this is what it's going to look like. And so then I go through all of that. And now I have this weird little sketchy version of it. Now, the interesting thing is that I used to then take that document and update it with all the stuff. But I've gotten into this habit now of I just open up two docs and I go down it and I add it to the new one. So I still have the old one. It takes less time than deleting them. And I can keep on looking at what I was referring back to. And so what I do then is I'm sitting there. And by the way, one of the other little tricks for Mac users is that Safari will, if you drag something out of Safari into Keynote, it'll just drag over and the image will appear. If you do it out of Chrome, it will pull over the link to it, which you don't need. So I open up Safari and I have it there and I just start grabbing images and throwing them in. I know that eventually if I'm going to show this in public, if I want to show it to other people in the office, doesn't matter. But if I'm going to show it in public, I'm going to have to go back and buy a bunch of images, and that's fine. But right now I go to Google image search. I then go into tools and set it for high resolution. And then I go start searching, and I just start grabbing stuff. And and you can do things like this object, white background, or PNG or whatever, or alpha, or, those are all there. Like you can put that into your search terms and you'll get all these images that are that include that search term. And so then you grab logos, like I grab a lot of logos. I grab them all at really high resolution, much higher than I need, because that alpha channel will work better even when I scale it down. Now, what it will do is create really large keynotes. I mean, a lot of my keynotes are 400 megs or something like that. Like just sometimes gigs of stuff, because I'm throwing all these really high resolution images, but it looks nice. Nothing worse than going to a web page watching someone's presentation and they've got low resolution images. Come on now. You know, like you can find them. So so anyway, so the anyway, so then I grab them all in and I pull them in. But I'm on my laptop. I'm on my laptop or my iMac or whatever now. I do not try to build docs, build keynotes. I have done it as a test, and it's, for me, super painful. Like to try to build an actual keynote document at full quality. The touch controls is not something, the way that the touch controls work is really slow. If you're good, good at using it, just, you can't get to everything fast enough. And so, but once I'm done, I oftentimes present from from my iPad. Go ahead, Chris.
I think it was Spielberg who once said that he didn't like nonlinear editing. I don't know when he said it. It was probably in the 90s, because it was too quick, and he liked the process of cutting on film because it made him think about everything he was doing. I know that when I create a deck for a talk that I'm doing, I appreciate what you said. Makes a lot of sense. I do the exact opposite. I actually like start at the beginning. I in my head, I know where I'm going to go, but the process of building and finessing things helps me organize my thoughts as I go step to step. Also, you mentioned logos. Are you familiar with brandsoftheworld.com?
I'm not.
Oh, come on.
I just searched the logos.
Brands of the World has logos for everything, and you can get vector logos. Sometimes they're the legit logo from the company, which somebody's snorfed off a website somewhere, but sometimes it's recreations. Sometimes they're not the best, but often it's exactly what you want. Brands of the World for EPS logos. I've been using this for like almost 20 years, Alex. Come on.
That's great. Go ahead, Bill.
So major presentations, I almost always start an Omni outliner because I just like a structured outline. If I don't have a major presentation, if it's a minor keynote, I will actually start with their bullet template slides. I will make a bunch of them. I will go through and I would add, and I try to let myself be free. Even if I would never put 9 bullet points on a slide, because that's stupid, I will do it there because I'm just trying to capture thoughts about it. Then the second pass, I will take those bullet lists and move them into notes and start working on them one at a time. That tells me, have I gotten to that? Where am I at? 4 slides. I have moved my original bullets down into the notes field, and I have to work from 4 on. And eventually then I start putting graphics down there, and then I challenge myself, do I need any of the bullets to appear on the slide? And if I do, how few can I get away with? And that's my way of sorting through.
I've gotten rid of bullets. It took me a long time, but I don't show bullets anymore.
I know, and I don't show them, but they are for me that's what I want to see in my presenter.
Now I have images pop up that would be like bullets. I have things that an image that describes what that is, and it pops up, and then this pops up, and this pops up, and it is a bullet. Like it has it with a text underneath it, but it looks so much better than a bullet. And if you stay out of that, it just is much more visual and much easier. But I don't use bullets anymore. Like as of like 2 or 3 years ago, I just stopped using them. But it took me years. Like, I'll get less of them, and then I just decided I wasn't going to do it. Go ahead, Brian.
I start with the PowerPoint the presenter made, convert it to Keynote, and go from there.
We do that a lot. Like there was one where the one that was really eye-opening for me is that I spoke at WWDC in 2007 or something like that. They asked me to come and talk about compression for QuickTime, and so I spoke in the main room, and it was like tons of people, and they have this company called Duarte that does all of their graphics. And anyway, I was so nervous. And when you're doing WWDC, you meet with someone like every week for like 12 weeks. Every week you show your presentation, and they go, okay, well, what about this? And what about this? I mean, it's unlike anything I've ever worked on. So by the time I got to WWDC, I think I had what was the best deck I had ever built. I mean, it was just a work of art. And I walked in, and the guys at Duarte looked at it, and they said, "This is amazing. I mean, we don't get decks like this ever." And I was like, "Yeah, because I make a lot of these." And I was pretty proud of myself. And he goes, "Is it okay if we tweak a couple things?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. Do a little thing here and there." They just tore the whole thing apart. Like they just ripped it all apart. And they sat there. They had one assistant and one guy and then you saw how Keynote really works. Like you have one Keynote artist and an assistant. And the assistant has opened. They had a Getty stock license, site license. And so they just like, okay, I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this. And the guy's just like passing these images and in an hour, then it was really the best presentation I ever had. But it's, you really, but what I learned was how to break things up visually, how to look for things that were there. And it's not nearly as refined as it is now, but that's one thing you want to really think about is when you're building these presentations, whether for broadcast or other things, is how do you have those visuals really underline what you're going to talk about? Go ahead, Ken, and then Alex. Then we'll go to Hosmuk after that, and then we'll go to questions.
Yeah, I was going to demonstrate how I now make my keynotes. I think it was from when you said, Alex, before I was kind of having the main slide and then a little image of me, in the corner. But now, I can only really show what I do with this is how I do it for the audio chain that we say.
And this is something to think about as you're thinking about broadcast. This is Keynote without a key fill going right into your Atem. And so the ability, you want to look at your ability, like we talk about all kinds of tools that we can use and what you spend on them. And you can just build the broadcast graphics inside a Keynote. And we did it for years, just doing Keynote. Now we got into other tools, but if you know what you're doing, and what we're going to do someone should remind me by putting this in the second hour, otherwise I'll forget. But what we do need to talk about as it's related to this, we're not going to talk about today, is keying in the Atem. I think that keying in the Atem is a whole second hour. If someone puts it in and just reminds me, we will go through. I think we could probably spend a whole second hour just on luma keying, but we'll probably do chroma keying and luma keying in there and talk through it. But yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, so because I actually chroma key mine graphics on there, mainly because it's very easy for me to do that. So I'm really interested in how you luma key it, but because I can then adjust the edge and the background.
Yeah,
like that.
The main thing that the chroma key or the luma key will do is there's just a little bit of aliasing on your curved edge that will go away when you luma key it. So because your chroma key is doing a 422, so when you use chroma key, and we'll get into this another time, but when you use chroma key, you're using half the color information to key it. So you're keying basically a 960 by 540 image as opposed to a 1080p image when you do that. And so that's why, unless I have to, I won't use it. Go ahead, Alex, and then Hosma.
Well, yeah, just a couple of points on design. You don't need actual marks or dots next to your text and bullet points if you just use better spacing between the points, because there's actually no need for them, because actually spacing between bits of text is better, because the dots are only just there if you don't have enough room for space. Yeah. And also, because Keynote is essentially designed to open up, partially designed to open up PowerPoint layouts and have them look exactly the same, it defaults to PowerPoint's very wide line spacing, so that the default text looks very presentationally as opposed to typographically correct. So the first thing I usually do when opening up a PowerPoint presentation, even in PowerPoint, is to select the text and go from like a line spacing of 1 to a line spacing of 0.9 or 0.85, and that works always, just makes things look a lot better. That's just kind of a little design perspective.
It's a really good point, is that Keynote presents text significantly better than slides in PowerPoint. It is one of the secrets to why things look better in Keynote, is that it's kerning all the way around, and its line spacing all are better than and I don't understand why someone at Microsoft or Google didn't figure that out, but their stuff always looks it looks presentery and not Keynote tends to look print-like, and much nicer that way. Go ahead, Hosma.
Yeah, thank God I did my last slide deck presentation in business almost 15 years ago. And when I think about it, it's so horrendous just to think about it. So I had to prepare a orientation talk for this medical event to talk to all the attendees. And I used obviously the Atem and I keyed in the images, but I put my script together, my thoughts together like a video script first, exactly what I'm going to say on paper. And then I thought about how not to use any text at all in my presentation in the live broadcast. So everything was image. So I would go through divide the agenda. We're going to talk about structure, and we're going to talk about the platforms you use. So the structure, I got a nice little Lego kind of image, building a structure. And a platform, I use a gas fuel, the platform they use on. So I use that as a platform. And a couple of people asked me in the meeting, why is that fuel thing there in the talk? So I said, well, that's the platform, and just that discussion kind of made it quite an interesting engagement instead of just having the text in the slide.
Yeah, and it's I used to say 20 words was the maximum, and now I will do almost everything to keep it under 10. Like if I go over 10 words, there's like a whole bunch of me looking at, like, what did I do here? And now I do, like, I make decisions, like there's going to be a little section of text in each one of these because there's something I'm trying to do, but it's never by accident. It's never like offhanded that I do that. Okay, Alex, real quick, and then we're going to go to questions because we've now talked a bunch and got a bunch of questions.
I mean, I would also advise people, don't illustrate metaphors. When you're passing something on to somebody else, don't show sports metaphors of relay races and stuff like that. So illustrating the metaphor, especially if it's a tired metaphor, it's been worn out and cliched, then eventually people will be thinking about the cliche and what you've worn out by talking about it as opposed to what you actually got to say. So I try and take when people give me a presentation, I take all the things that illustrate the metaphors out and then actually talk about content.
Unless it's Wayne Gretzky and the puck thing. You can use that forever.
Skating to where it will be.
There we go. Next question. First question.
First question. Moving into David Brady, New York. Designers tend to deliver decks with full raster photos rather than resample and resize. Are there any scripts and or methods to optimize things for the web?
Go ahead, Brian.
Automator. If you're on a Mac, you can use Automator. You can make a workflow, but you can also make a system service. You just right click on an image in the Finder and convert it to a preset scale. Let me see if I have it here.
Automator and Shortcuts will do the same thing, where you can build up a service that will just you can have it just set up to even look at folders, and you just drag things on and it'll just make them the size that they want to be. Go ahead, Ken.
My mic was open. The universal one is a website called iloveimg.com. There you can drag in and you can resize, scale. All the thumbnails I do on the office hours I've done from that, and it's web-based, so it doesn't matter what platform you use for that.
Go ahead, Carl.
So it's actually building the Keynote. So let's go to Keynote for the answer. So you want to go to File, go to Reduce File Size, then you get this lovely docs. So this box here, so what it will do, it'll choose your video. So you get to choose what resolution you want your video. You can go up to 4K, of course. But more importantly, whatever your resolution of your slides are, let's say you're doing 4K, so 38 by 21, then what you can do is actually just say, I've got 50 megapixel images coming from my camera. When I hit reduce file size, it will reduce all the image sizes down to pixel to pixel match. So 1-to-1 match. So that means you're not going to be able to edit much easier. You're not going to be able to scale once you do this. But the most important thing is the two buttons down the bottom, which is create a copy or edit the original file. You want to create a copy, keep your master. So if you do go editing, you can just go through this process really quickly again, and then export a smaller version again.
That's great. Good, Schy.
HEVC on that is a new format. Is it? What's the value of that, and what's the gotchas?
iPhone.
Yeah, it's your iPhone is what it's shooting oftentimes, and then it's not as compatible, but it's much more efficient. So HEVC is much more efficient than H.264, but
inside the Apple inside the Apple universe.
If you're going to do the presentation, you're not going to hand it to someone else. HEVC is going to give you higher quality for a smaller size. Whereas if you're going to send it to somebody and you don't know what they have, then you don't want to. Then it becomes more problematic. Go ahead, Carl.
So Keynote only runs on Apple devices. All modern Apple devices support HEVC.
Well, and current operating systems. So
well, that's the thing. That HEVC won't be supported in older versions of Keynote. It'll say you'll need to update it. So it'll actually tell you, and that's why you can save as Keynote 09. There's an old version you can save as, so that's why that's there.
Yeah. Next question.
Tony Mobley, Newman, Georgia. Why should parents encourage their children to learn Keynote?
Go ahead, Carl.
I think it's a better form of a resume for certain situations. That if you can actually do that via Zoom, that's much better than just handing someone an A4 sheet of paper with some dot points.
Go ahead, Bill.
I think it's what I said before. You know, vocal is the primary information carrier, but the fact that you have access to imagery and text and graphics and everything else empowers your presentation. So for them to learn to add all those elements into how they communicate with the world, very powerful.
Angela?
It's just another tool. It's another thing with the computer, being able to get your mind to wrap around what is an image, what is a video, how they work together, how movement works, using like the transitions with the motion the motion
magic moves.
Magic moves. Thank you. It just gets your mind wrapped into spatial things and visual things, and it's just a different way of thinking.
Okay. Go ahead, Alex.
I think it helps children understand that an audience, to put themselves in the position of an audience, because they're actually using a tool that they can see, as opposed to what they say and what the other person says. So there's an actual piece of evidence. They're saying, well, this is, if you're using part of this argument to explain what you want to explain, what would people understand from just this? And that, I think, helps people break out getting the transitioning from what's in their head to what's in the head of the audience.
Having worked in most of the FANG companies that they talk about, people think that report papers are important and you'll never use them again once you leave college. I mean, nobody writes reports except for academics. Everything is run on decks. Like the world runs outside of education, government, and some academics. The entire world runs on decks. And so it is the whole thing. Every idea, every sales pitch, there's a deck or a demo. Is what there's some companies that just run on decks and demos. You show something and then you show a deck of why it's going to work. No one cares about anything else. And you can write all the pros you want, except for Amazon. No one cares about anything but the deck, and so you just want to giving kids the ability. And the thing is that, why do we have such great, soccer players and or football players and American football players or baseball players, is because they started when they were kids. And so when you look at kids who, this is something that I think kids should be learning how to do from the time they're 8 or 9 years old, is building Keynote decks, because it's free. And when they get good at it, they'll start, all the design principles and everything else become more and more natural, and it gives them an advantage. I think I went to a community college when I was in high school to do horse production, because we raised horses. So I really needed to know the information. And my uncle took the same course with me, and he has a degree. He had a degree in farm production, and he got a B- and I got an A+. And I don't think I had better details, but I had an Apple II, and I made lots and lots of graphics, and lots of pretty pictures. And I wowed my teacher with all the cool diagrams and pictures and everything else. And all he did was type something out and drew a couple things on a piece of paper and Xeroxed it in. This is the 80s. He just didn't know those things, and I had them. Your kids having that understanding how to know Keynote gives them an unfair advantage right now. A fair advantage if everyone does it, but right now they don't. It gives them an unfair advantage over everyone else, of being able to show those things. Next question.
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. Could someone demo setting up a Keynote presentation to send out to a Luma key?
Go ahead, Carl.
So I can do this now if you'd like. It only take about a minute. So
we'll go to the next question and then have you come back to it. Oh, you have it. We'll come back to you, Carl. Next question.
Comes from James Babbitt in San Diego. And James says, when you're developing Mukana or maybe an office hours app, do you use Keynote first to plan the layout of the screens?
Yep. Every app, every interface that I think about, I just do it in Keynote. I lay everything out in Keynote so that I can, it's just faster. I also oftentimes create all my slides with it. So if I have we'll be right back, slide, starting soon slide, the slide that I set up for doing a countdown clock, I build all of those stuff in Keynote because it's just a lot faster, to build it there. So absolutely. Go ahead, Angela.
I mean, I set up shows like that when we have couple different screens, even if we're not using like an Lumen with one deck and actually having it be a deck, I'll do it as like a proof of purchase, like just for the client, just to proof names, proof whatever. And it's so much easier than sending like a video of like, here's what's going to be on this screen and whatever. Just like, here's 3 boxes, here's the screens, this is approximately the layout, and they get a full feel of what those screens will look like.
Absolutely. And Carl, just raise your hand when you're ready. Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles is up next, and he says, can your panel members show an example of for using Keynote for storyboarding?
I don't know if I can pull one up. I can't pull one up that I can show you because we spent money on it and we have NDAs and stuff like that. Go ahead, Carl.
So I'll go ahead and quickly show the Luma key and also show you quickly a linear key as well, because that's kind of easily to do on the one and the other. And maybe you can show us storyboarding something in the future, Alex. All right, so this is essentially way I would show it on Office Hours. I'd like to show it this way, to go through the Atem. But if we want to do a Luma key, then the one thing that you'd probably want to do is you want to go color fill, and you want to change that color fill to black. So we'll go down and we'll select black. So, not green. So see if my mouse wants to behave. And there's black.
None more black.
But the problem, and so what this, yeah, that's right, this is ink black. So essentially when you select black, and then you can go into the keyer inside the Atem. But as you can see, the image here is black as well. That's why I've chosen this image. So there is a trick that Alex has spoken about in the past. You can go into the sliders here and just adjust the contrast down to -1 or -2. So, and that'll allow you, so when you come back out of that, we'll just get rid of the little window here when the spinny ball of death wants to go away. And so that's lifted the grays, and so that won't get cut out when we do the linear key. There is another thing we can do as far as a linear key. So with linear key, we'll click on the background again, and we can go to color fill, and we change that to no fill. So now there's no fill, and this is a thing that we've talked about, saying this is a terrible idea because we don't know there's no fill. It still looks like black. But when you go to File, and you go to Export, and we go to Export an image, JPEG will not give you the alpha channels, but there are 2 different formats in here that will. So let's choose TIFF, which is our highest quality version that can give you the alpha channel. And so when you select TIFF in here, you can ask for it to have no alpha channel or with an alpha channel. Now it's asking me which slide as well, because it's not going to know. So I'll have to tell it 1:1 because it's going to have different 1:1. 2:1. And let's change that again to TIFF, and we'll go to PNG as well. So either one of these, but yeah, either one of these will allow you to, when you exit it, when you export it, it's going to have an alpha channel built into it. And so it's a very handy thing, but you have to have no fill selected as your background for the image for that to work.
And and again, you can use a Luma key if you want to keep on. I use Luma key because I want to keep editing that right up until the last minute. A lot of times I'm working on my deck and updating it. But if you get the graphics all done, you can export it out like that, frame by frame by frame. The main thing is that you can't play it out. This is something we've been asking for I don't know, a decade. Is Keynote being able to do a key fill support on the way out? Bill and Angela, real quick, because we have a lot of questions.
I was just going to say, think about what a storyboard is. All it is an image that is going to be a kind of what you want with some text under it, which means that you can take a little digital camera out. If you're going to shoot something for a company, go to their site, take some still pictures, bring them in, add text that describes the action. You've got a storyboard. It doesn't have to be a hand-drawn thing. It could be, and that's a great thing if you want to do that. But just think outside of what a storyboard is. It's just image guides and textual explanations.
Well, one of the things that I don't think Keynote does very well. I think the connection with Keynote to photos isn't great. One thing I really like about OmniGraffle specifically is that I can have lots and lots of templates, and it's just really easy there up there. Now, one thing to know is that in Keynote, and I can try to work on this in Keynote, you can actually, there's a little third-party program that will take Illustrator files and convert them to Keynote ready, import them into Keynote, and then you can have them in that dropdown with all your shapes. So you can have shapes you use all the time. So then you build those shapes into it and work through it. Go ahead, Angela. I wasn't ready to show that today, but I'll find it. Go ahead, Angela.
So just to build on what Bill was saying was that whether you take sketches or camera and add words, if you add words in the notes section and then export it as a PDF, as a printout, then you have the storyboard little square plus your little notes on what that square is. So it's a really quick and easy way just to have it all laid out right there.
And what I've used in the past is one called, but from Christian Holtz called AI to Key. Is how I take AI stuff to get it into Keynote so that I can move logos and concepts and stuff like that. And a lot of times what I do is I'll have a bunch of things that I use to illustrate stuff. I have them, I buy them from iStock Photo. So I have lots and lots of them. And then I convert those all to what I need. So then I have it in a drop down and I can throw it in there. Let's go move to the next question because we're running out of time.
Sure. Douglas Carmichael's up next. I've seen PowerPoint used for graphics at events like sponsor logos and lost child announcements. Could you dynamically connect Keynote to a web-based front end to make announcements easier to manage? Hey, Tim.
I don't know. At that point, for dynamic things, we would tend to use a web page. A web page that you can update. And that's not very hard. But for dynamic changes like that, I think that we'd probably do a web page you set to full screen, and then you build a little interface that just says, I want to type this in, and it just changes. I think that would be probably easier if I was going to try to do something dynamic. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, have you ever used Keynote for diagramming networks or desiging racks? And would there be other tools more suited to that task?
Go ahead, Bill.
And that's where I think a tool like OmniGraffle, what it does that Keynote doesn't do is it has tons of tools for aligning, connecting. And so you build boxes, you can connect them with the lines. And when you move two of the boxes out, the connecting lines move with it. So it's just super fast to do diagramming.
And Keynote does have a connection tool. So there is a line connector. I don't know if Carl can pull it up really quickly or if you use that very much, but there's a connection tool that you can have. And I'm just trying not to waste everybody's time with me opening up Keynote at the moment, but it's not in your menu when you open it up. It's really interesting. Like Keynote on its own does not have the connection tool available, but it is a super powerful tool to make this work. And I'm going to try to. There we go. Go ahead, Carl. Oh, there you go. And now the one thing I have to admit, I've never done the corner. Are you doing that with two separate lines or are you using the connection tool? I can't hear you, Carl.
So what I'm doing here is, this is something I learned from a YouTube channel who uses Keynote for some pretty high end, and he actually animates lines. So this is a very basic line build. Right. But I've been playing around with some pretty sophisticated line builds as well, where you can put two lines on top of each other. You can have like a snake chasing its own tail. Right. So essentially you have a white line, but you can have a blue highlight going along that line, like a snake going down. It's like a snake going down the road. So I've been playing around with that kind of stuff. And this is a very basic kind of line build, but you can build lines and build very complex structures.
Yeah, and you can also, there's a connection tool that lets you do the magnetic thing that you'd see in OmniGraffle. Unfortunately, it's just very slow. So compared to OmniGraffle, it's not as fast to set it up because you have to keep on selecting these. And it's not like with OmniGraffle, you can select one to many and hit connect and it just connects them all, and it just does all the things you need to do. And so it's a lot faster, but it does, you can do some of those things in Keynote, and I definitely do that. There we go. That's Chris is showing that right now. That's a connection tool that you have there, and that's connect. And it's a little problematic in the same sense that it tends to connect to to the center of a larger image. Oftentimes I'll group a small white or a small whatever box to where I want it to connect to, and then group it with that so that I can get it to go where I want it to go. Next question. Oh, I can't hear you, Bill.
I'm sorry. Tim McKean, Chandler, Arizona is up next. For those that use outlines first, what outlining tool do you use? PowerPoint will bring outlines in from Word. Can Keynote do something similar?
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so pages and numbers can be like, you can have a table from pages and a table from numbers being brought straight into Keynote natively. I would avoid that unless you're doing like a financial presentation, but yeah.
I actually use it a lot to bring in when we do pitches, I will build in numbers. I'll build out my, the end, what the costs are, related to that. And then I drag those into Keynote, and the calculations stay, so you can make subtle, small changes to it while you're in there. So it's really treating it like a deck. Go ahead, Carl, and then Bill real quick.
So iBooks Author has now been ported into Pages. So a lot of the tricks you can do in iBooks Author, you can now bring over to Keynote via Pages. Pretty cool.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, Bill.
Same people that do OmniGraph will do Omni Outliner. It is a robust outlining environment. That's all it tries to do. And I like it because it gives you a lot of flexibility and it's really easy to change things.
And I have to admit that I use Notes just because it's on everything. When I open it up, it sinks in and then it's there. So my whole world lives around Notes. Next question.
Rupert McCrae again from Dallas, Texas. What are some known upcoming features on the Keynote roadmap, or what are some missing features on your wish lists?
Go ahead, Carl.
The ability to play out alpha channels.
Yeah. So key fill out is a big wish list. USDZ, another wish list. Go ahead, Alex.
I've said it before. I'd like to be able to open up my Keynote presentation in motion and then tweak the animation. So you could actually, weirdly enough, be using Keynote as a thing to prepare motion animations. So you do your whole presentation the way you want, and then you can actually open up the magic move and then do whatever you want to. It's in Keynote. That would be amazing.
I'd love to have an active, like a motion. I'd like to be able to do what you do in motion in Final Cut, where save it out and put it into Keynote. So there's a little animation that's there that you built, and you can have the controls, and it would publish the controls to Keynote, so that you'd be so in a relationship between using motion to build things for Keynote would also be, I think, pretty exciting. But I feel like the trajectory for Apple, eventually we're going to get USDZ in there. And I think that's going to be revolutionary. When you look at the object capture, like right now, object capture is a little complicated because they just released it and there's just an API and there's a command line to do it. But my guess is by September, we're going to see 30 apps that do it. And you're going to be able to just very quickly, literally grab objects, rotate them around right now in motion or something else and drop them into Keynote. There's going to be some point where you'll be able to do that in Keynote, and that's going to be massive. Next question.
Comes from Ken Jones in Seattle. Ken says, short of try, fail, try better, fail better, is there a go-to training spot for a Keynote newbie?
I don't know if there's a go-to. I don't know. I've been doing it for so long that I haven't really paid much attention. Bill, real quick.
One of the things about Keynote is that the basic rudimentary operation is so easy and intuitive. Literally, you drag something in, it shows up, you resize it, you grab the corner. Most of those basic Mac things are just built in.
Still a lot of tricks, like the ones that we haven't really gotten into, and I don't know if we'll get into them in this hour, is the way that things animate in and out. And there's a lot of ways that stack and group that are pretty useful. Carl and then Schy, real quick.
So lynda.com, stuff like that is a good way. They have big programs. Ripple Training, I think, also has a Keynote as well, I believe.
Go ahead, Schy, real quick.
Well, I'm wondering if the Apple Store would have something, and he's right next to University Village there, that might be also something that they do those classes at.
Yep. Next question.
Dan Goldstein is up next, and he says, is there a way to standardize the timings of transitions when importing video out of Keynote?
Go ahead, Carl.
So there sure is. So this is called build order. So in build order, this is a slide I showed before with the lines. So here it is, and you can actually go in and select any one of these and go and change you can see a delay. When you select on one, you can see the control panel as well. The control panel will allow you to change its timing. I like between half second and 1 second. I don't want to keep people. I think it defaults for 2 seconds for a lot of things. I like to trade that in half. I don't want people waiting too long. And I group them. As you can see, I've grouped them here. So when I click one transition, they will all come in, but they won't come in at once. They'll come in one after the other with no delay. So if I've got half a second, it'll be 2 seconds for all 4 of those things to come in.
Go ahead, Angela, and then Brian, and then we'll move on.
Actually, Dan's my coworker, and he has noticed that when I export Keynote out of video, it isn't very accurate. So I think that's more of what he's questioning is if those transitions, because I'll do 20 different play-ons and he'll put in like a certain timing in it, and he's sick of like trying to find the right frame.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know if maybe it's for looking for a precision that it doesn't have, but that's an interesting problem. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, if you're transitioning between slides, you can set a single number that will show it, but so you'd have to say that every slide is going to happen after 5 seconds and then a build after 2. So there's very little control. So when I've used it for video to go into Premiere or something like that, there's a lot of cutting and freeze frames and so on to time it to a voiceover or something.
Go ahead, Bill.
In my experience too, if you've got multiple things happening on a slide when you make the transition, they happen kind of sequentially. So I've seen things delayed to start. It's still going to be a second, but if I've got two things going on at the same time, one happens, two happens, then that transition happens. It's going to feel like it's delayed and its timing is off, but it's just doing complex stuff in the background sometimes.
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So this is actually a feature built into Keynote. So you'll see here for video, remove trim parts of movies and audios. What's happening is it's taking it from the iframe. When you do remove trim parts, it's going to create a new iframe for whatever you've told it to be. So it's actually picking the iframe if you don't trim it. So if you select this button and say, make this version of it, please, then what's going to happen is it's going to remove the trim parts, make a new iframe, and that's why it's out of sync. So it may be because of your iframe, maybe 3 or 4 frames before, and that's where the video will have to start in Keynote. So doing this process will give you a new iframe and therefore be trimmed more accurately to what you want.
Next question.
Moving on, Douglas Carmichael's next with, is there a way to control Keynote via OSC or a similar external control protocol, or would you need to use separate applications like Brome's MIDI translator to translate MIDI to keystrokes?
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so Keynote only understands 2 things, I believe, which is forward and back. That's why most of the controllers have forward and back and a play video function sometimes.
Yeah, but you could definitely use an in-between app to do that. And I know that some people, I think even Grant built one that you can use on a web page. Just click on it and it'll send what needs to happen.
Yeah, keystrokes.
Yeah. Next question.
Tim McAlpine in Chilliwack, Canada says, not a question to build off the app prototyping question. There's an amazing tool called Keynotopia that includes all of the OS interface elements.
And I have most of those interfaces. And there's a little subscription you can get for Keynotopia. I'm glad you brought it up. It's a great site that I have used heavily over the last decade. So, and I pay the subscription happily, and I download lots of things. Next question.
Jeffrey Widgren in Kansas City, Kansas. How do you balance your slide content for the different type of learners, such as visual, audible, and reading?
So there is, having text as a reference, especially if you're going to put out a statistic or you're going to put out a number, those texts are valuable for people. So you don't want to go to completely hieroglyphics that you're going to put up there. So having some reference points when that needs to be underlined, statistics, specific numbers, specific things that you want people to remember, having a couple words up there is great. Generally, though, as soon as you move to text, people can read or they can listen to you, but they generally can't do both. So when you have to think about how long does it take to read that slide. If they're reading it for that period of time, they're not listening to you, or they're not reading the slide. But they're not doing both of those. So the thing is that it's a very old way of thinking. I want to put a bunch of text on the slide and make people try to read it. It also creates a cognitive load. So listening to you talk about something technical that their brain has decided is important, and reading something that you've established as something that's important, creates cognitive load and makes people sleepy. So what the result of cognitive load is people get droopy-eyed, because you're putting too much information in front of them at one time. What you should be thinking about is how do you both, when you get optimum cognitive load, they're actually excited about it. That they have a connection to it, and they're more likely to remember it. So those are the things that you kind of want to think about as you build it. And oddly enough, academics don't usually get that right. They're like, I'm going to dump they don't understand cognitive load, and cognitive load is super important when it comes to presentations. That's why we don't use virtual backgrounds, is because virtual backgrounds and the edges create cognitive load, and what we think about, I think about all the time, literally all the time. And the reason we do conversations, everything is cognitive load, is how fast are you getting that information, and how many different senses are you using at the same time, and are they congruent or discongruent, and if they're discongruent, they will create cognitive load. When they're congruent, they can actually increase energy, and so you have to think about that all the time when you're doing a presentation, a show, whatever you're doing there. And that's what you see people get really good at it. Just TikTok. That's why people watch it all the time. Now that they've added 3 minutes, now there's more cognitive load. So I've stopped. I don't know if I'll keep on watching it. Go ahead, Chris.
Can you point to any empirical studies about cognitive load? I'm astonished at how many times I'll have somebody, they're like, oh no, we have to put all this information up. And I try and explain to them, no, once you give me something else to read, I'm not listening to what you're saying. So why are we doing this all at the same time? And I find it very difficult to sell the idea to them.
I've definitely talked about it, and I didn't come up with that. I mean, it's something I, watched in some thing about presentations, and I don't remember where I got it. So, but it was years ago, 20 years, 25 years ago, like that of cognitive load and thinking about it as you present. But I don't know where it came from. So I'll try that Google take a look. Yeah. I'll try that Google thing. Your Google is as good as mine. Go ahead, Ken, and then Bill.
The example that I use, and you often use it, Alex, is Apple are the richest company in the world. They've got data to present a lot of information. Look at their keynotes. Yeah. They don't have that would be my example of saying, well, they can do it. That's how they do it.
Apple is the gold standard. Like that is as good as it gets when it comes to understanding how to present data. Go ahead, Bill.
And interesting enough, I was about to comment on Apple. When they did the chip designs, when they're moving to the M chips, they would put up a slide that is unusually dense for them, but it's generally the graphic of the chip. And they will have little call outs. So like, here are the high efficiency cores, here are the general cores. And it gives you a sense. And for me, as I was watching them do that, I thought, this is brilliant, because for the general audience who doesn't understand chip design, I just know there's 6 of those and 2 of those. For somebody who's a chip designer, they can stare at that and will learn much more from that dense visual presentation of the chip architecture than I ever will. So your audience has different cognitive abilities about the slides you're putting up. And I think they're brilliant about satisfying both those groups or many groups.
Well, and Apple is also very aware of who its audience is. And so they're going to put a dense thing in front of an audience that wants that kind of information.
Yep. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, Carl, where did you get the game controller and house icons? Those are very well done.
All right, so let's quickly. So these are the ones he was talking about. So house icons and the game icons. So essentially, where these come from, very quickly, let's get rid of this one. So it's pretty straightforward. So if you come up top here, you'll see shapes, and in shapes, you'll see symbols and art and science. So you'll come through. Now, Alex did say you can actually bring your own ones of these in. That's true, you can. So these are just ones that are built in, and these are all vector-based, so you can make these large and small. You can make these the full size of a slide. But yeah, you can bring in your own vector-based graphics as well, which is really cool.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Something that isn't immediately obvious is you can use any of those as a mask for an image. Let me switch over real quick here. All you have to do, I'm going to drag from my desktop an image in and onto that game controller, and it will mask a photo, and you can scale in there. So there's built-in masks you can do. That's there, and these can all be modified too, which is also something people don't really know. So you can make an object editable and do things like change the shape of it or add parts.
Well, the most important one is that you can get rid of Antarctica from the world map. like just every time I build a graphic, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't need Antarctica. Like I'm trying to explain something, I don't need that. And so the first thing I do when I keep on meaning to save it, into my own things, and I never get around to it. I've gotten so good at it, but I go in, make it editable, get rid of Antarctica, then do my map, because I do a lot of like global whatevers, and I'm just like, I know that I'm being very discriminatory against Antarctica, but I think that there's just not that many people there. I mean,
Alex Lindsay
I hope
hates
your
penguins.
mailbox doesn't blow up with
penguin
Antarctica.
demographic.
I know. There's a lot of penguins that are really upset. When the penguins go extinct, it'll be my fault. Go ahead, Ken. And then we'll go to the last
a very quick way of if you use Affinity Designer, which is a vector-based, and you create your own vectors, and you can literally drag those from Affinity Designer straight into Keynote. It's the best, quickest way of getting your own custom vectors in there.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana has our last question of the day. He says, when you're expecting Keynote movies with a transparent background, 444, is it really worth it to do 60 frames if you're using it with an Atem Mini?
You have to. If you want it with an alpha channel, you need 444, because all the other formats don't carry the alpha channel. So if you're going to do Luma key, then you can do it at 422, 422 HQ, all those. But if you're going to export something out that is going to have a alpha channel, it has to be 4444. So there we go. So it was interesting. Oftentimes we do these, and I don't know whether it's worth it or not. But this was a lot of people watched, so there was definitely a lot of people interested in Keynote. Go ahead, Chris.
Can I take 30 seconds to show one feature that never came up?
Yeah, let me note real quick. I think on that last question, though, he was interested in the 60 frames. Is it worth exporting at 60 frames rather than 30 frames?
It just depends on. It depends on
Get
if
anything out.
it depends on what you're
You're going to. What you're going
like
to.
if you're doing a 60 frame show, then do 60 frames. If you're doing a 30 frame show, then do 30 frames. You know, that's
There you go.
there we go. Good. Thanks for catching that. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, so this is how I basically just put a dissolve in on both of these, and we talked about how you can stack these together and make them, you know, go together. But if I select this thing and I say build it with number one, it goes exactly the same, but this delay feature is really nice because it gives some overlap to things as opposed to just everything being here's what the first thing, here's the second thing.
And especially
you get these nice little ripples of things happening.
And especially when you have things animated. I mean, you're fading them up, but when they're sliding all in, you can have a whole lot of things happening with slight delays that are, you know, you can really create some complex experiences. And that's the thing. And we'll do more of this if people want to. Just put it in the request to talk about. We can talk about probably one thing here for a while. I don't know if we might do some Keynote labs or something where we give everybody the same thing and have them put together a presentation. We'll do on Saturdays or something. But I think that it's the most powerful app that I use. I mean, not the most powerful, but the most valuable. Like it's the one that generates business, you know, and gets ideas done and sells ideas and gets people excited. And you know, it is the most important app in my grouping, and it took me a long time to figure that out. Like I didn't respect it because I didn't pay for it. You know, like it's just free. It's a free little app. So when people ask like, "What's the most important app?" I'd be like Motion or After Effects or Final Cut or something like that. And now I'm like Keynote. You know, and you know, we're potentially working with a bunch of teachers this fall. And the number one thing we're teaching them, Keynote. You know, so make sure he goes like, this will make things a lot easier. Go ahead, Schy.
And to your point of using notes first to get your outline cleaned up. So I'm going to go back to my go-to and story first. And so to support what you're saying is the visuals. So it'd be nice to do a yes and on story.
It's just that I just find that I make better presentations when I think about the whole timeline before I because of the problem I get myself into is that I lose the thread if I'm working on individual pieces. I go at Hosmuk and then we'll close it up.
Those on Windows, what do they use as an alternative to Keynote?
They have friends.
Carl.
So they can use Keynote via Chrome in iCloud.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. If you're really doing a lot of presentations, I mean, you know, PowerPoint, of course, is the most popular, and Google Slides has, you know, you can put in the web. And so there are other options. They're just not as powerful. Like they're just bluntly, they're not as powerful and they don't look as nice. And so they are usable. But even Emily, who is a ninja in Google Slides, when she started using Keynote, she was like, "Oh, you know, this is why Alex talks about it all the time." So anyway, so I think that and even if you're a ninja, it's much more powerful. So anyway, that's it. Great work. Thanks to our fine producers asking a lot of questions. That was great. And we really had to push hard. We ran a little over on both, but the Keynote didn't run over. It just started late. So Keynote was perfectly timed, but we ran a little long on the questions as panelists, but lots of good data to chew through. So thank you to the producers who were asking those questions, and thank you to the panel for yet another 400 and some in. When are we getting to 500? I don't even know where we are. I don't know how many of these things we've done, but 400 and some that we've done, and they're all good conversations. It's kind of amazing. Anyway, so thank you very much to the panelists. And now we're going to jump into the post show. So we'll either see you tomorrow or we'll see you in a couple minutes or a couple seconds.